That's what the Australians say anyway, I'm told.
All the time, don't worry.
Yeah, I love it. All right,
Today
so
I learned.
we're recording, so I'm just going to make sure everything is... So, okay, so it's Mario's... Is how it's pronounced? Jesse Mario's?
Yeah, like Mario with an S, so like Marios, if that makes sense.
Mario with an S.
That's the one.
So I did spell it right. David spelled it wrong.
Thrown him under the bus already. Bang.
Yeah.
Well, I just saw your name, and I was like, oh, well, I would imagine that Jesse spelled his name correctly. So it must be the show notes that were wrong. All right.
Totally.
Alrighty. In 3, 2.
You're watching Diecast Breakdown with Chuck Ellis, David Johns, and Mark McHuntwheel. So sit back, strap in, and hang on. The breakdown starts now.
3, 2. Hey there, folks. Chuck here, and welcome to another edition of Diecast Breakdown. I am so glad you're here with us today. We are really excited. We have got Jesse Marios from Oswheels here. I hope I said that last name correctly. I've been practicing, but we'll see once we get to him. But before we do, I want to thank our executive producer level patrons. That would be Mr. Twice Diecast. Thank you, David. That would be Driven Dreams Org. Thank you, Mark. And Dane Self, our honorary executive producer level patron, First and 64th Customs, and of course, Video Geek Productions. Thank you all for supporting the show. And of course, the people who make the show go at all the different levels. If you want to know more about joining their ranks, you can visit diecastbreakdown.com or click the little join button down below. That is a great way to help keep the show going. And of course, continue to share and spread the word because we've got great guests like the one we've got today. But before we get to him, I want to introduce my co-host, Mr. David Johns. David, how the heck are you today?
Doing great, Chuck. Good to be here. No place I'd rather be.
I almost got through this intro well. We've only done like 65 of these things. So
I loved it, man. That was awesome.
Thank you very much. And those dulcet tones that you're hearing are our guests today. Jesse, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to talk to us about Oswheels today.
That's no worries at all. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, so I love this kind of interview because it's so rare that we actually get to be on the leading edge of something new and exciting. And this is one of those things that makes David Johns say the phrase that pays. And that would be, David,
there is no better time to be a diecast collector.
It is absolutely true because we got a brand new brand. We just had cartooned over at Diecast Con, and now we've got Oswheels. And Jesse, before we get to Oswheels, I want to hear a little bit from you. Why tiny cars? What was the drive to get into this line of work?
So for the past probably 5 to 6 years, I've been doing a lot of product development with Diecast Distributors of Australia. Now, previously in Australia, we specialise in doing 43rd, 18 scale models. That was sort of the collector scales, if that makes sense. And over the last few years, we've been looking at ways to get that end consumer product. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion if we started running 124 scale cars and do them high detailed, we could pull the pricing down and make them more achievable to the end consumer. So we've started sort of fiddling with that idea, and as we started going more and more, I started getting a bit entrenched into the Hot Wheels collector clubs and things like that all through the social medias, and just sort of watching what they talk about, what they're chasing, what they're interested in, all the things they wish that people would make and they never see, things like that. So I started throwing in the odd comment here and there and stirring up a bit of a discussion about different topics in regards to 64 scale cars to then see what people would react to, if that makes sense, and see if there was a potential market there for us to jump into. And the more and more I got into it, I noticed obviously Hot Wheels, one of the biggest players or biggest player in the world, they've done, and their share or market share in Australia is massive, even though they only have a very small range of Australian cars. So I looked at it and went, well, what if we can do something and fulfill the market and give everyone what they've been chasing? And yeah, this is where we came out.
Very cool. And were diecasts a favorite toy of yours growing up, or was this just kind of a market opportunity that you saw?
So I've always been a petrol head, if that makes sense. If it's loud and silly and can do cool things, I mean, that's me. Motorbikes, trucks, cars, it doesn't matter. I sort of appreciate all of it. Early on, I was actually a chippy by trade and I was building houses. When I was in a pretty bad car accident and I got smashed by a truck. So ended up shifting up careers and thought, what can I do that I really love and I have an interest in? And I thought, well, cars. And then, well, what type of cars? And then sort of as it kept going, for a long period of my life, my old man, Tom Marios, is the one that actually owns Diecast Distributors of Australia. So pretty much since I could walk, he was always, come and work for me, come and work for me. And this, so we, for a long time, he sort of pushed and pushed and pushed. And then when I started doing my own thing, he sort of stepped back. And then when it all sort of fell the way it did, he turned around and said, well, would you be interested to have a crack? And I turned around and said, well, if we can do some cool creative work and maybe look into producing our own stuff, and I'd love to have a crack. So that's sort of.
Now, I'm very curious. So we talked a little bit before recording. What is you mentioned 1/43 and 1/18 scale as being the collectors, and those were kind of classically 1/18 scale has always been the big collector scale here. I remember visiting my friend's parents' house and the dads that collected these, they always collected the 1/18 scale. And I think the trend towards 1/64 scale has a lot to do with people live in smaller houses now, or they're trying to not have as vast collections anymore. And again, the tech has gotten so good that the detail on 1/64 scale is better. The amazing stuff that we can do now with rapid prototyping and 3D printing and getting these cars ready to market and rapid manufacturing processes, it's incredible what can be done now. But I'm curious your take on the Australian collector car market when it comes to diecast. What is the culture like over there? What is most popular, and what kind of trends have you seen in that business, being that you've kind of worked very closely in this world?
Yeah. So Australia's always had a bit of a funny relationship with diecast because of the way that, like, our entire culture from pretty much mid-60s till mid-90s, early 2000s was really, we were a car culture country. You were either a Ford man, or you were a Holden man, or you were a Chrysler man, and that's it. And I sort of laugh because even growing up, it was never really, like, race was never an issue. It was more people talked about the cars. It's like, oh, what kind of cars do you like? I like Fords. Oh, I like him, sort of thing. It was sort of the whole culture around our country. I mean, I don't know if you've seen things like Summer Nats or Rocky Nats, or they're the big car shows that we have in this country. And essentially they are guys that build 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 horsepower burnout cars. So the whole show is basically designed that these guys go into a little skid row and just absolutely blow the rear ends out of the tires, throw rods out of the blocks. They just go basically until they either blow off the motor or they blow the tires out of the car. So that to me is sort of how I try to explain the car culture, if that makes sense. Like our whole fundamental of our country sort of thing, how we operate is very much called to what used to be also Chrysler as well. Obviously being the biggest player because they were more marketed as exclusively owned by Australia, Australian run, even though it was a GMANZ child company, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's sort of, that's what pushed the diecast sales. So a lot of the real car sales in this country, and I know Ford was obviously brilliant at doing this, first on race day, release a car, send them out, make them go racing, make them win, and then sell lots of the cars, which is essentially what they did here. So they went to lots of the big names at the time that were racing, pulled them into the sport, and then built the rivalry around that. But it's sort of tried, in a sense, tied together with the diecast, because the more that people got involved and were buying the real cars, well, no one was going to back then go and do replicas of real cars and things like that. It was sort of not really cost effective. So then a lot of guys got together and said, well, what if we make replicas of these models? And that's sort of where kicked it all off, really. 43rd scale was the biggest one that we had sort of coming through here, and that was from Trucks. Trucks was the main one that did that, which they did about 120 different ways at the start. And that's actually tooling that Diecast Distributors owns today as well. So it sort of shows how the industry sort of goes full circle as well. So some of the guys that start in, and then nowadays with myself and what we're doing, we're actually going to rework all the tooling. We'll do new components, new wheels, things like that, new chassis designs and things so that we can re-innovate, if that makes sense. So because Australian cars, there's a laundry list of them that you could potentially make. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a nostalgia sort of thing. The reason why Series 1 was such a big hit was the Kingswood, the four-door Kingswood. They sold 420,000 of those cars here in this country. It's actually the biggest production vehicle they've ever sold in the history of this country, which was a massive statement. So a big part of what we sort of try to do is revive a bit of that car culture. In the past sort of 10 to 15 years, we've lost a lot of that. Since a lot of the motorsport has gone to tubular chassis and shells and things like that, similar to what you guys have in your NASCAR, I imagine. It's sort of lost a lot of that passion and that connection to the brains. Because a lot of that in this country, that's what it was. It was Ford versus Holden and who could make the fastest race cars and the fastest production cars. And that's what even me and all my friends we used to fight about. Like, I grew up in a Ford household. A lot of my friends are in Holden household, so we'd go back and forth, back and forth. And I always laugh because at the end of the day, I look at a lot of cars like they're real art, if that makes sense. So to me, I can sort of appreciate the design cues, the notes in the engine specifically, things like that. So that's like a big thing for me that sort of keeps my involvement.
Sure. So you're a Ford guy, so you loved the Beast movie, right? Eric Bana's
I am.
Falcon story.
Be back with more Diecast Breakdown after this word from our sponsors. Legendary Hollywood concept artist and designer Fireball Tim Lawrence has created 3 exclusive pieces of automotive art based on the 3 hosts of Diecast Breakdown. Get these and other brilliant designs printed on mugs and more at fireballtimgarage.art today. Diecast Breakdown would like to thank Diecast Heroes Magazine for supporting this program. Diecast Heroes Magazine is the premier digital and print resource just for diecast customizers. Visit diecastheroes.com and see what the best customizers in the world are up to. Here's this week's small channel shoutout.
Jody Sims.
If you have a favorite Diecast channel with less than 700 subscribers and you'd like to see them highlighted on a future episode, email us at diecastbreakdown@gmail.com. And now back to Diecast Breakdown.
So it is a unique it's a unique pride in Australian-made vehicles, and we see that, Jesse, in some of the passion that we hear about for specifically Australian diecast. I know the Hot Wheels Australian cars are just absolutely eaten up by collectors in Australia. And we'll kind of lead into Oz Wheels here, but just talk about, I guess, when collectors in Australia, and I'm sure you've talked with enough of them, it's just an absolute rabid appreciation for the Australian cars when they're in diecast, right? Maybe a lot of collectors over here aren't aware. Maybe 20 years ago, there were some makers making just some absolutely iconic Australian cars, and they're very hard to get your hands on nowadays, but they're absolutely beautiful, and they're fun because we don't know what they are. We'd never heard of a Monaro or a Tirana, but they are, personally, they're some of my favorites in my collection. But when I hear collectors over there talk about when they get their hands on those over there, it's just an amazing, I don't know, it's a sense of pride for them to have those pieces in their collection. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Well, like I said, one of the biggest things here is the car culture in this country. So, I speak for myself, but every collector I've ever spoken to, a lot of collecting sort of stems from they wish they could have the real ones. I mean, don't we all wish we could have a big garage full of all the one-to-one scales. So, specifically in this country as well, there's a lot of pride around Australian-made, Australian-built, Australian designed. And I do tend to think a lot of that these days is because there is pretty much nothing Australian-made anymore. Everything's sort of pushed out overseas and sourced. So it sort of made everyone swing back the opposite way and have more of an appreciation for what was done here, specifically as well in regards to Australia's engine builders are something of like another planet. I guess would be the easiest way to explain. Like things like the I don't know if you've heard of the Barra 6. So they did a 4-liter inline 6 motor over here that they put a stock bottom end in and can get 650, 700 horsepower out of it with very minor modifications. The power and the design of what they did, and I think a lot of that also pushed it a bit more as well, because we've always been about racing, about going fast, about doing crazy things. So when we had engine builders come out, sort of enabling that more and more and more, it sort of pushed the culture more in the country. It sort of pushed more people into doing crazy burnouts, all this sort of stuff. I used to be majorly drawn into more of the drift scene and the JDM stuff when I was a lot younger. And then as I started getting older, I was like, man, the design cues, the shape, and it was all just elegant in these cars from this whole era. Yeah. And even to a point with, like I see, engine design, things like that. Engine notes are very specific to cars. So when they design them right, it's almost like music. And I sort of think a lot today, again, they've sort of lost a lot of that. And that's sort of where the car culture sort of changed a little bit. But that's part of the reason why we do what we do, to try and re-establish that and sort of show people what a lot of what the country was doing.
So now we're on the precipice of you kind of introducing or reintroduce folks in Australia some of the cars in 1/64 scale that are they're really hard to come by because other brands, unfortunately, aren't doing a lot of them. So can you maybe talk about why you picked the models that you picked for Series 1 and maybe Series 2 if you care to, and maybe how they were the very first entry, and hey, Australians, here's what we've picked for you.
So a big part of what I try to do is tell a story with it, if that makes sense. So for me specifically with Osweirs, what I wanted to do was sort of tell a bit of my story and my experience with the Australian cars, if that makes sense. So picking out all the things that I remember growing up that I had a close connection with, or cars I remember seeing in magazines and driving past the car show or walking past the car shows and looking and being like, wow, like, it sort of sounds funny, but I was the kid, like the kids in the museum. I was walking around and crawling under on the floor and checking underneath and looking at the chassis and looking at fuel lines and looking how everything works and all of that. So what we sort of try to encompass into Osweirs is to enable a platform for me to sort of take people on that ride, if that makes sense. So the first cars that we did being obviously the Portal HQ and the panel van. I mean, I've always had a massive love for the panel vans. I laugh that I do get in trouble for this all the time, but they're known as shaggin wagons here in Australia. Apparently, yep. Yeah, apparently you're not allowed to use that terminology too much no more. So it gets me in a bit of trouble. But that was the main reason for that. Sun, surf and sand, that was the 60s in Australia. That's what the big push was, the Gold Coast and the beaches and all this. So I, again, wanted to sort of, if we're going to launch the brand and show what the roots are and what we're about, then try to pick things that were the main iconic cars. So Ford or HQ, obviously the biggest selling sedan or biggest production car they ever had in Australia, and then doing the panel van, which was sort of a pull. Also at the start, Holden was the main priority, specifically because we already had all the licensing tied up to do it. But at that same time, being a Ford man myself, and I did push this on the line, I was like, please bear with us. Series 2 is going to have lots of Fords in it. And that leads me to, into Series 2. So we've chucked in XWs, XYs, XAs, XBs, XCs. So what we've done as comparison, to Series 1 would be Series 1 was the 2 different body styles in the four-door sedan and then the panel van with a few different front end and tail combinations. But what we've done for Series 2 is there's 12 different bodies. So I've tried to basically show that from all the support that we're getting and all the amazing collector base and fan base that we've picked up so quickly, that I'm going to turn around and put that all straight back into more products, increase the range out more, and go from there. So things like we're going to have XA, XB, XC in a combination of coupes and four-doors, which typically four-doors weren't made as much. There's the odd occasional 1 or 2 in different scales, but same again, unless they could do the race cars with them, they weren't really a big thing. But my main one in Series 2, which is the huge one for me, is XWXY. My old man is Poor man. That's all he ever owned. All growing up was he's obsessed with his Falcons, even to a point of when me and my sister were born and then we moved up here. My mum actually, he ended up having to make it sell it because he had about 6 in the backyard. Because he used to get them rebuilt and then drive them around for a bit and then sell them. But obviously kids come to the backyard, so Mum and Dad decided to get rid of the cars. But part of why I dropped that into Series 2 is I've actually bought a body that I'm getting my uncle to rebuild for my old man as a clone replica, a Yellow Ochre Phase 3. So that was the very last Falcon that he owned. That he sounds a bit funny, but I've never heard the man ever say in his life he regretted anything, right? Like, never, ever. And the only thing ever was that car. He'd always say, I regret selling that car. Man, I never should have sold that car. And this and that. So I turned around and obviously with the Oscar's launch going so well and things like that, I turned around and thought, well, how can we do something cool for Series 2? How can we sort of bring a story to it a little bit? And then I thought, well, what if we build the real car and then we'll make the models of it as well? And that way they'll sort of tie it all together. And so that's amazing on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Chuck, this is why we love doing these shows and these interviews. When we hear from the diecast makers, Jesse, there's always just a story, and it's always so fun to hear the story behind the car. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's funny because it reminds me of, we interviewed Round 2, some of the guys from there not too long ago, and I've got actually over my shoulder here, there's where is it? There it is, right there. That little red and white Impala is Tony, who was a designer at Round 2. That was his first car. It was his dad's car, and he passed it on to him, and he still has that car. And so he made his own little version of it. So I've got it hanging on the wall behind me. And so I understand. I have a 64 Plymouth Valiant that is my first car. I've had it since I was 15. I restored it.
You still got that?
My wife and I and my friend Ben still got it. Still got the car. We spent 6 years. We took the car completely apart. I had never worked on a car other than just keeping that one running. I had it for 15 plus years, and then it finally literally fell apart under me while I was driving one day. The engine just kind of dropped into the radiator and shredded it. Still drove it home. It still made it home because it's a slant 6 and you can't kill them. And drove it home and started disassembling it and didn't stop disassembling it until there was not a single fastener left on the unibody. And we had the whole thing media blasted, and we rebuilt it in our garage, and I did favors at the local auto body shop until I could get the price down so I could afford a decent paint job. And then we drove it to the Chrysler National Show in Pennsylvania, and we won a Judge's Choice Award with it. It got featured in CarCraft magazine. And
congratulations. That's awesome.
So still got it. It's going to be my daughter's when she's ready. So yeah, she loves it. She was brought home from the hospital in it. My son was brought home from the hospital in it. So yeah, that's I feel your story deeply. I've heard so many stories from folks like your dad who they would hear, oh, that's your first car. I'd give anything to have my first car again, or I'd give anything to have this again or that again. And they'd be guys with supercars, and they'd be like, oh, it was like a 77 Lincoln Continental that I had in the 90s. It was like a $500 car. And, but I would give this car to have that exact car back again. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You're driving you're driving a Lamborghini, man. But anyway, it's true. Like my dad was a letter carrier. This is way off topic here, but my dad was a letter carrier, and he delivered mail to these houses. They were multi-million-dollar houses on the water in Florida. And this guy, he was a Powerball lottery winner. He won the New Jersey Powerball and moved to Florida and bought a mansion. And he had dozens of cars, just all these beautiful muscle cars and supercars. And one day this 82 300 ZX shows up. And my dad's like, what's this? Like he actually thought somebody was maybe swapping out cars or replacing what. And he's like, no, that's my first car. I found it. I got it back. So I think people who aren't petrol heads or gear heads don't understand the emotional bond that happens with vehicles, that there's something visceral that happens between certain people in automobiles, and it doesn't happen to everybody, but there's a tactile thing, and there's the the tribe aspect that happens, like in Eric Bana's Love the Beast, where he says, this car is our campfire. This is where my friends all gathered and we shared stories and we worked on this car together. And it was such a powerful story. I actually built a 164 recreation of the Beast after its wreck, because I build weathered and wrecked cars. That's my thing. I do customs, and usually they're dented or rusty or whatever. So I very carefully went over all the pictures of the car after the wreck and recreated it as best I could. But unfortunately, I don't have it anymore. I gave it to a friend. But that story gutted me. And I was thrilled to hear that he finally restored it. Like, he was able to rebuild it, and that it is back. Yeah. I wish that they'd done a follow up, because I would have been very interested to see the follow up on that. But yeah, I love that there's this personal aspect to it. And so you mentioned that your dad runs Diecast Distributors of Australia. So tell us a bit about that, because a lot of our listeners and viewers are probably not that familiar with that company, being from over here. So tell us what that is and what all y'all are doing with that right now.
So the business officially started in 1998. It's been running for 20 years now. When they originally started up, they were the exclusive Hot Wheels independent distributor. So all the Hot Wheels Elite product they used to make, things like that for the hobby store, exclusively by them. Since all that sort of slowed down a little bit, they've increasingly pushed the brand out a bit more in terms of distribution. So now we're currently the exclusive distributors for Greenlight, Lightning, also things like Solido, GT Spirit we have as well. So something that they were very passionate on, and obviously Dad loved the cars too. Then since I sort of started working here, the big push was always that I wanted to do our own manufacturing. I did believe that we had the ability to do everything that we needed to in-house and start manufacturing our own stuff over in China and get it shipped over. So in the last 5 or 6 years, we've really pushed a lot on specifically 124 scales being the main focus, but we've also since started doing plastic model kits. Now, plastic model kits are something in terms of Australiana product, but there's basically nothing available anywhere that you can buy. You can get the odd occasional resin body, but they're quite expensive and not really good, to be completely honest. So then we looked at it again and we thought, well, what can we do to sort of increase the hobby market and share a bit of the love for the Australian cars? Because there's so many kit builders everywhere in Australia, but no options. So we found out a way that I could tool up all the tooling at the start, do it in a way that we can multi-use some bits and pieces of it. But it essentially got it to a point that we can produce the product at a really reasonable price point. So we actually retail them, which in USD it's probably quite expensive, but in terms of Australian product, we retail them for $69.95. In terms of value for money sort of thing, something similar would be around $99 to $109.95 RRP typically. So a big portion of what we've sort of tried to do, what I've specifically tried to do, is product to the end consumer. Obviously, we're all in business to make money and whatever, but for me, it was about sort of maintaining that passion and sort of getting the culture rebuilt. And I'm like, that was the main focus for what we want to do. And that's what shifted us a lot into the mass market products. So things in the last 6 months, we've developed our own range of 124 scale light-up cars. So they have headlights and taillights in them with an opening bonnet and a little push button switch in there. And they retail for $45. So in terms of value for money, they're about 35 to 40% cheaper at retail than a die-cast equivalent. And they have the working headlights, tail lights. So we sort of tried to go after the younger generation and sort of, again, the average dad, I would imagine like yourself, I buy infinite amounts of 64s for my son, but I probably wouldn't buy a $300 118 car. If that makes sense. So a big push of what we started to do in this country is shift all the marketing to a mass market and try to get like the new generation interested in the cars, specifically things like, again, my son's an example. If I ask him to point out a car, if it's a Tesla or a Lamborghini, he'll pick it every time. But other than that, he'll just look at it and be like, so that's why I've tried to sort of go back to that generation, if that makes sense, and target that market a little bit harder, because there are lots of guys like ourselves that have kids now that are car guys, and if there's options for a supply, it's something that we definitely do. So that's something, a big thing I'm trying to sort of push a little bit.
Don't touch that dial. Diecast Breakdown will be right back after these messages. Diecast Breakdown is produced in partnership with Twice Diecast and Driven Dreams Org on YouTube. Check out their channels in the video description and subscribe for more epic diecast content.
Hey, this is Larry Wood.
This is Derek from Honest Diecast.
Hey, this is Chad Reed from Round 2.
This is Mike from Gas Labs.
The SRT Joe Vita Show.
This is Champion DJ K.
This is Mad Vision here.
This is Diecast Dude.
And you're watching Diecast Breakdown.
And now, the thrilling conclusion of this week's episode of Diecast Breakdown.
Can we get maybe just some specifics? I have a feeling that Oz wheels are gonna, well, like you've said, they're gonna sell like hotcakes, and when they make it over here, we're gonna be fiending for them as well. Let's talk a little bit about what to expect when you get your hands on one of your pieces. Are they going to come like carded, like a Hot Wheels with a plastic blister? Just tell us a little bit about how you present Oz wheels to the collector.
Yeah, so they come carded with a blister on the front. Like, we've actually made the blister a little bit bigger and modified the front so that it will actually stand up perfectly straight. That's one thing that sort of really frustrated me a little bit with other products, is that when you go to stand them, they sort of tilt that forward that little bit. So we've worked on that. Another big thing that we've done in regards to the product is we blacked out the windows, and a lot of people ask, well, why did you do interiors in? So main thing being, of course, the biggest difference in a lot of these cars, especially in Australia, was they swapped up the interiors in. So a big part of what I try to push is we could sort of choose between interiors or have a bigger range. And 95% of the feedback I got back was just do the range. A lot of the guys were saying that they're sending me photos that they tint the windows of the Hot Wheels cars anyway, and they're like, we pretty much tint them till they're pretty much blacked out anyway. So yeah, we started to look into that, and we did the Toy Fair car as well. So we did a 2,000 piece limited edition run for DDA's Toy Fair stand this year, and we gave them away. And to be honest with you, the exposure on that car like crazy. So we tried to do something a little bit different and do a couple of different paint the combinations on it. So we did, like, the whole car was painted one color, and then they did a modified spray process for the back end. It was like the paint was fading onto the car, and just little bits and pieces like that in terms of getting displayed. Another big thing that we've done with Series 1, and we do go forward, is our chase cars that we do. I don't know if you've seen too much on them. Again, wanting to do something
tell us about
a bit cool as something that they can hunt out. Yeah, so we do two different versions of them. We've got the base model chase, which is we call the raw steel chase, which is basically a completely completely raw body that they do a clear coat directly over. So it's just the raw injection. And then on top of that, we do something that we call the super chase, which the super chase, they actually chrome the entire body. It's chrome plated in the color of whatever the chase is going to be, and they're super, super, super limited. So in Series 1 that we did 750 of the raw steel chases, and we did 90 of the super chrome chase. Thinking about it now, probably underdid the numbers just a little bit, but having said that, the very first one that sold of the super chase sold for $1,225 for a $12 a retail car. So in that regard, obviously, that was a bit eye-opening for me, which, sort of threw a bit of a spanner in the works. And even the raw steel version of the line went for $450. And at that point, I was blown away, because all I could think was, what have we created here? Sort of thing. I've never seen anything appreciate like that. And even watching through the collector pages and things, I was trying to watch what other chases and other brands go for, and treasure hunts, things like that, and didn't really know what to expect. And then, it just absolutely exploded, and it's gone crazy. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for me as well, but something that then we'll refine as well, numbers too. So that, because at the end of the day, we want them to be as achievable as possible to the end consumer. We do want the chases to be rare. We want them to be able to hunt them out, and that way then they get the reward when they do, as they do finally find one, if they choose to keep it or sell it or whatever they want to do with it. But it's been a very, very interesting kick-off, especially with what the chase cars have done, and the Toy Fair car as well. So that was one that we did 2,000 of. The very first one where we were giving them away to everyone at Toy Fair, of course. But one of the customers actually put one up for auction and got $350 for it first day. Just to give you a bit of an idea, I suppose, of the demand for these cars, and the fact that the industry and the market that we're trying to sort of to push onto has already sort of been developed to a point out of necessity, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily that a specific brand has built the market. I think it's that all the brands have done a little bits and paid everyone the cars out, if that makes sense. Like they're very, very desirable now as opposed to before, where in the past on Hot Wheels car that would get released, they'd go up in value, but they wouldn't go crazy. Nowadays, they released that A9X White Ferrari. I guess you guys would have seen that in the Boulevard set. They were selling for $80 to $100 Australian here all day, every day. So guys were picking them up from the stores and then selling them for times the recommended retail price. And again, so that's why I sort of turned around and was like, well, how can we fix this? Like, I don't want people to feel like that they can't buy collectibles because they aren't achievable. So how can we sort of shift that around? So that sort of leads me back to what we did with the interior and the details and things like that. We tried to go a bit over with the amount of static display detail we get. So we removed the window and the interiors, and then we did rubber tires and individual wheel components as opposed to just doing plastic wheels. So try and give them that bit more look. It also gave us the ability to then do what I call standard or factory cars and then the custom cars. So having big blown up low profiles dumped under the body and dropped down low, but by also then being able to do.
I love the intentionality, especially the rubber wheels. Like you didn't have to give rubber wheels, and that's a very nice feature of your brand, Jesse. Kudos to you for that. So maybe some timelines. Series 1 is out, sold out. You can look for retailers to find them. When might Series 2 be hitting distributors?
So Series 2 is due to land in the country in June. The reason why the little bit of the delay is obviously this time around, tooling-wise, I went a little bit more, I suppose I could say. But again, that was by design. But it's to show them that we're making a bit of a statement. The first set was a smaller set of mixer cars. This time around, we're going to do a big set. We've chucked in lots of Fords and Holdens. We're also putting utes and police cars. And a big thing which that we haven't put out anywhere is wagons. So one big thing in Australia is station wagons, right? So
we got plenty to pick from.
Yeah, sort of. Well, basically, yeah. So wagons are huge in Australia. Wagons are probably one of the biggest things in terms of like how to explain. I wouldn't say joke builds, but like things that people are like that you wouldn't expect. So imagine a station wagon with a 600 cubic inch, 1200 horsepower, big line fuel injected motor. It's really, really big.
Like a sleep.
Yeah, that sort of stuff is very, very big over here. But station wagons specifically, no one's really made them because they've always thought that there's a lot of potential market, specifically race car versions they could do on the station wagons and things like that. So they've always sheered away from them, but that's something that we're working on right now in tooling that we're going to have drop. Won't be in Series 2, but in Series 3 we're going to have our first station wagon drop, which is going to be amazing. But
That's fantastic.
Excellent. I know you're a Ford guy, but is there any plans for a Chrysler, say like an AP5 to get made in the near future?
Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend.
I've been times. And the funny thing is, I love the audience. I love the BX show specifically. I actually, side note, that about 6 years ago, when I first started working here. And one of our customers actually, there was a bit of a friend that I've been dealing with talking about Ford, had a 69 VF 4-door with it's got a 3.0 is in it. And it's got a torque light 727 that's been manualized and I built like a drag car sort of setup sort of thing anyway. And he was get rid of it. But he lived in country Victoria, couldn't really find anywhere. So I did a bit of a deal with him and organised it, hit up the old man. I was like, we got to go down to Victoria. And he's like, all right. I said, I'll book all the flights and everything. He's like, yeah. We get down there. He's like, what are we doing here? I'm like, we just got to go pick something up. So we ended up going on the train about 2.5 hours out of Melbourne into literally like, if you picture the most desolate place you could possibly imagine, this is where we are. There's tiny little tops in the whole thing. It's a beautiful place. And yeah, we pulled up and I was like, that's for you. And he burst out laughing and he's like, the Wolfmobile. And he's like, oh, we had so many of these growing up. Like, I'm Greek, right? So
Yeah.
we always used to laugh that the big thing was they'd always say they were Wolfmobiles because the Chryslers really, the main target demographic in Australia was all the Greeks and the Italians were buying them. So we always used to laugh that they were the Wolfmobiles. But we drove that car, that VF, from Tarragona in Victoria. We drove 3,300 kilometres back to Queensland, all the way up the coast. Awesome.
Yeah.
But yes, to answer your question.
Well, that's very cool. And one thing that I always like asking manufacturers when we have them on is you don't just wake up one day and go, I'm going to start a diecast brand and just have it happen. So what is the process, if you could describe for me, when you go, I want to make these Holden panel wagons? Walk me through that. You go, okay, well, I want to make this car. What happens next?
So the first thing that we do is I'll typically go and try and find somebody local that has a one-to-one version of exactly what I'm looking at. Obviously, that could be quite difficult depending on the year model of the car, because a lot of the time it might be crashed and repaired or rebuilt, and no one really knows 100% of history. So that's the first basis we start on. So we go and get a 3D of the one-to-one car. Then after that, we send that overseas, taping in, refining that, scaling it down. Then off that, I will go online and get a combination of somewhere close to usually about 200 or 300 images, all different angles, all different profiles of the cars and things like that. And then compile a bit of a list of dimensions of the vehicle and angles of like window pictures and things like that as well. And then after that process, we'll get sent back from the engineers at the factory. They'll send us back what they call their first shot or prototype 3D. So they'll send us those. We then print them on our 3D printers in-house here, and we'll go over them, have a bit of a look at them, see what needs to be changed, compare it to our images. We also do where we do like a trace line art over the top of the shape of the body. So using the 3D renders, we pull the illustrations out of it and then dump that over the top of real car images and things as well, so that we have lots and lots and lots of different reference points, because again, different camera, different angle, different lens can all change like every shape or component of every vehicle. So at that point, it's sort of, you've got a good reference point, if that makes sense. So we try to use the 3Ds of the real car as the main reference point, and then we use the images and overlays, things like that, to sort of come back to there. But after we've got the prototype done, then they'll proceed into what they call test shot phase, which is they will design all the tooling and then they'll do a blank injection. So they inject all the tooling for the very first time and they send us an unpainted everything, basic, just prototype. And then after that, we'll go back to them with what we call line art. So basically imagine like a stencil outline drawing of the vehicle, where we've got to color in all the different components, put the badges, and essentially design the car, if that makes sense. And then we send that over to the factory. And then they send us what they call a deco sample, so a decorated sample, where they actually hand paint and hand do the entire process. And then they send that to us and say, are you happy with this? Is there anything that needs to be fixed or to be changed? And that way then I'll sit down and look at it and go, well, obviously you can tell bits and pieces that have been hand done. So you know that when they do actually mass produce them, they're going to be better. But I'm always a firm believer, I'll mention it 6 times, not have it happen once. So I always go back to them and be like, I know this was done by hand, that this needs to be better, or this needs to be more detailed, this needs to be refined. And then after that, basically, we go through the process of designing our packaging artwork. So usually that'll start with a basic concept idea of what I want it to look. In the past, I have done all that sort of work myself, but specifically with Oswheels and with a designer that's based in South Australia, specifically because he's got a lot more training in artwork and design and graphic design. I'm really self-taught with everything that I do. So I thought for a product like this, it really needed to be special and needed someone to really do an amazing job. So I went to Rocco and got him to start working on it. And then he sent me all the artwork, all that was finalized, sent over to the factory. Then they print out a sample of the backing card with the J-hook in it. He sent me a sample of the blister. Typically, they will staple the blisters on at the start just so that I can pull the statements out with either card art or anything like that. So I put reference points. And then other than that, then they just send us a finished sample, which is usually after the stock's been produced. They'll air freight us out a production sample and just say, just before we ship the product, please confirm this is exactly how you want it. Everything's correct.
That's amazing.
Fantastic.
Jesse, did I catch that you're going to have jeweled headlamps on the vehicles, on the models?
Yeah. So one of the cars in Series 1 has got dual headlights. So what I mean by that is they did a lot of different front-end combinations in Australia where they basically would change the front grille of the headlight configuration and maybe one or two things on the interior, and it would be an up-spec model. So that's a big thing that they push a lot of over, and that's something that I want to work towards doing more of. All the variants and things like that of different options, because that's something that in the past a lot of car manufacturers typically don't do, which again comes down to if you're going to tool up a single car, you really want to tool up 8 different bodies to make that one version of the car, whereas most of the car companies will go, well, no, there's no point. I've been working with a couple of engineers and found a bit of a creative way to design all the tooling.
So we touched on this a little bit, but right now, Diecast Distributors of Australia is the place to be to buy these cars. Not that you can buy them now because they're all sold out. Congratulations. But we had mentioned a bit before the show that you're looking at some other countries for distribution as well. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So the main one at the moment is obviously I'd love to start stepping into the US market. So that's something that we've been looking at. I have been approached specifically by a distributor in China that said they'd be very interested. Obviously, 1/64 scale in China is just ridiculous. It's like the biggest market share in the world in terms of diecast, which blew my mind even, to be honest with you. I mean, I knew obviously they make a lot of that stuff over there, but I didn't think that.
Yeah. Sure. It's wild. One of the things that we've really as we've delved into the hobby is realizing how big they are in places like Indonesia, Malaysia, that they're like when Hot Wheels dropped that Proton Saga casting a few months ago, everybody lost their minds over that it was such a big deal which it was funny because I was like, why does this car look so familiar? It's like, oh, it's a Mitsubishi. That's why. But it's not a Mitsubishi. Yeah. It is a Proton Saga. It was made for similar stuff, but it was made fully in Malaysia. And I think it's so cool. And they did a brilliant job on that casting too. You can really tell, like it feels like a step above your standard Hot Wheels car. Like it's got, they've figured out a way to incorporate lensed or jeweled or whatever it is, headlamps into the design using the windshield. Yeah. And that's something I think that has been really clever on more mainline stuff. But I think that the wonderful thing about all of this, and there is a lot of scary stuff and a lot of people are afraid of this crazy huge global market, but it's really kind of drawing a lot of people together because we're learning about other countries and other cultures through their cars and through what they do with their cars, whether it's the crazy customs out of Japan with the fins and the pipes everywhere, or the burnout vehicles of Australia, or the rally cars, the Bathurst rally cars, or Formula One, and they're all showing up in my little store in Gainesville, Florida, which population 100,000 people. And I just got that 2-pack Holden thing from Hot Wheels. They're on the shelves now, which is very exciting.
Yeah,
and it's just so cool to have those things around and know a little bit about them and actually be able to reach out and talk to somebody who is from there and has experienced these and is actually making this stuff happen. And I think that's the really cool thing about the time we live in, as David likes to say again and again. And I just can't get tired of hearing him say it. But
I got to say, guys, there's going to be an Australian diecast renaissance, and a lot of collectors are going to owe you a big thanks, Jesse. I can't imagine the product would be any more well received in another country than you doing Oz Wheels in Australia is and is going to be. We are going to be so on board and so intent on following the success of the brand, and I can't wait for series 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, if I'm honest, because I will be gladly sending my money to whoever I need to get every one of them.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
That is music
I
to
might
my
have to do
ears.
that because I'm looking at these and going, man, I missed the boat on this one. I should have listened to David
Rubber
when he was like,
wheels.
hey, check these out, and I was like, yeah, I'll get to them, and then it's like, oh, they're all gone. Oh, yeah, again, a very good problem to have. So, congrats. Absolutely a true joy to have you on, Jesse. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your time with us to talk about Oswheels and Diecast Distributors of Australia. We wish you nothing but the absolute best. We're going to be looking forward to seeing more from you, and we'll absolutely want to have you back on when you got some new series to launch and talk about. But before we go, for people who want to find you, follow you, where do people go for all of that information?
Yeah, so we're currently on all social media platforms, so Instagram, TikTok as well. So if you look at Oswheels, it's under @Oz_wheels, and we're also got our website that we're looking at building now currently. So because we do not sell directly to the public through Oswheels itself, we'll have like a basic domain that we're setting up. But at this current point in time, you can find all our information on all our socials, including all up-to-date release information.
Oh, fantastic. And we will make sure we link to that in the show notes. But again, thank you so much for being here. And of course, thank you to our listeners, our watchers, wherever you're consuming this content. We are so grateful that you're here. And again, a big shout out to our patrons that make the show go. If you want to join their ranks, you can visit diecastbreakdown.com. And while you're clicking around down there, make sure you're liked, subscribed, all that good stuff. A lot of people are coming to us that are not subscribed. We welcome you to join in the fun. We are a whole lot more than just a podcast. We're posting shorts and videos and reviews and news and builds and all kinds of fun stuff, all things tiny cars related. So be sure to click around and see what we got, because we got a lot to show you. And we are so excited to, again, be helping Mark with drivendreams.org. We're raising 24,000 cars for kids in need around the world. If you want to know more about that, you can visit drivendreams.org and find out how you can contribute. It's so simple. You don't have to ship anything. You just have to pick a local charity that accepts tiny cars, usually new in package. I know Mark is working on something where people will accept used cars, loose cars. But right now we're focusing on the new cars. So folks, if you pick up a couple extra at the store and find a charity, whether it's a children's hospital, women's shelters, food banks, Ronald McDonald House accepts cars. There's a lot of really great charities out there that are in need of toys, and a lot of kids out there that could really use a smile. So be sure to check that out. And again, a shout out to Mark. We miss him, but we are so glad he's at home with his new baby, and we are thrilled for both of them. There's a little 510 for Mark. And again, thank you so much for being here and joining us today. We will see you again real soon. And as always, we want to thank you for coming along with us for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.
Thanks for listening to Diecast Breakdown. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and tell a friend to listen in. Find Diecast Breakdown on your favorite social media platforms or visit diecastmedianetwork.com to learn more about this and our other projects. Diecast Breakdown is a presentation of Flying Valiant and the Diecast Media Network.